It is ridiculous that Tucker Carlson gets to go to my country, Jordan, walk freely, meet with all these ultra-rich businessmen who are loyalists to the government, polish the image of how Christians are being equal, living freely in Jordan, and demonize Israel. And at the same time, I can't go to my country. Why? Because I converted to Christianity and because I am a Zionist. So imagine the irony there.
As more Americans begin questioning their support for Israel, one Middle East insider says they're being sold a dangerous illusion. In this conversation with Dinesh D'Souza, former Muslim Danny Burmawi explains why Hamas, Iran, and political Islam are very different from what many in the West have been led to believe.
I want to, as we enter this critical phase of the Iran conflict, begin by talking about what I'm going to call the Tucker Carlson perspective. A lot of young people are attracted to it, and I want to spell it out a little bit. The perspective, as I understand it, is this. The United States has entered into a catastrophic and self-destructive alliance with Israel. Yeah. But our true friends are not in Israel. They are, in fact, in the Islamic world. We have a lot of commonalities, perhaps theological, certainly cultural and political. Islam is a conservative society. Jesus is a prophet in Islam, whereas the Jews, reject Christ. And the idea here is that the United States would do better to dissociate from Israel and perhaps make new friends in countries like Iran. Now, all of this might have been shocking a few years, certainly a few decades ago, but it is finding a receptive ear, as you know. Yeah. I'd like you, as somebody who has a real inside knowledge of the region and what's going on, to address if a young guy said, Danny, we're on the wrong track here as Americans, what would you say?
I've learned that if you talk passionately about anything, people would believe you. Because if you know how to come off as genuine, as a true believer, and that's how Tucker Carlson comes off to his followers. He believes what he's saying, even though, because according to him, he travels a lot, he knows the truth. He knows that in Israel, there's a freedom, and in the Islamic world, there's no freedom. And he didn't forget that, but he is actually hiding the truth. He's trying to sell a version of the Islamic world to the West that is the appearance, the surface, without what is being repressed, being pushed to the side. And that is all about freedom. For example, I'll give you an example. A few months ago, he referred to Baltimore. He said, Baltimore, it's like the crime. Dubai, it's amazing. Look what Sharia law produced. It's like, well, Dubai is a successful, prosperous city in a prosperous, successful country, not because of Sharia or because of Islam, but in spite of Islam. The United Arab Emirates, amazing country. I love the leadership of the United Arab Emirates. They're genuine. They're true to this kind of modernization. But since that time of Sheikh Zayed in the 70s, they did not focus on the regional core idea of the caliphate, the reestablishment of the Islamic State. They were focused on prosperity, progress. If you go to Dubai, to Abu Dhabi, you walk there in the malls, you will hear the adhan or the prayer call recitation. But in fact, the laws in the country, they have absolutely nothing to do with Islam. Cohabitation is the latest thing they decriminalize, I would say, in the country. So it was the importation of the Western values, Western system that made Dubai successful. On the other hand, Baltimore, this is the price of freedom. Freedom is messy. It's chaotic. Freedom will always feel inconvenient to people, especially to those who care about the surface, the appearance, not the substance, not the reality of things. So in a free society like the United States, because you're free to do whatever you want, there's no shame on our culture. People are allowed to show their failures, their dirty things. They're not ashamed of them. because it's their choices. In a culture that is built on superficiality, performance-based religions, people know how to hide their shortcomings. So that's the problem. And Tucker, he completely ignores that reality.
What I noticed with Tucker is the selectivity of his guests. For example, it is to me almost inconceivable he'd have you on because you would be a walking time bomb for him. But he carefully screens his guests and he practices what I would call ventriloquist journalism. In other words, he asks questions as if he's scratching his head. He's really wondering what they're about to say. They say what he exactly expects them to say. In fact, what he believes himself, but he professes to be shocked, astounded, blown away by their insights. Talk about one of the guests that he had recently that you know.
I overheard you talking to another guest just a few minutes ago. And you said, I had people who had different views, but I'm going to put all of that there. I don't care. So you're not going to hide one view. You're not going to amplify the view that you embrace. And I really appreciate that. And how I know that, it's because how you dealt with me preparing for this interview. You didn't ask me to say certain things. You did not dictate me any. It's like asking me a few questions that, in general, I don't believe that Tucker is doing any of that since October 7. I believe that all of his interviews are orchestrated. They're staged in a way to frame Israel as a demon and to fracture this line between the evangelicals in America and Israel. And this is in service of the Islamic project. Now, this is not about Israel. Let me be clear here. When I started doing this, after I left the Middle East, God is my witness. I had no idea. I had no planning to support Israel, to talk about Israel. I wouldn't even think about any of that. It's like, this is politics. I'm an evangelist, a theologian, a preacher. So I'm not going to talk about politics. But what happened is that I realized this demonization of Israel is actually, there's a hidden agenda for that. And that is the rebranding of Islamic jihad in the West. And this rebranding started way back in the mid of the 20th century. There were like a lot of players. One of them is the United States and the West. They benefited from rebranding Islamic jihad during the 80s, the CIA working with Al-Qaeda
against the Soviets.
Yeah.
The invasion of Afghanistan.
So they had to, frame Islamic jihadists to the American people, to the American public as, freedom fighters. But of course, then 9/11 happened and Islam was attached to terrorism. There was backlash on the street of the West, but the Western governments, they thought, okay, we need to absorb this backlash because it's going to get really ugly. So George W. Bush, he said, okay, Islam is a religion of peace. Islam has nothing to do with this. This was not rebranding, but it was actually an intentional rebranding of Islamic jihad. And since then, Islamic jihad is being, presented to the public as liberation movement, response to imperialism, resistance to occupation. And here is how the, Islamic movements and the radical lefts, they found this shared ground.
I mean, did we see it also in the Iranian Revolution, where the left partnered with the mullahs to go after the Shah? And in fact, you see, women in the aftermath of the revolution giving you the thumbs up as if to say feminism has just won a great victory with the ouster of the Shah. And so you see the roots of the Red-Green Alliance even there in the 70s.
Of course. Listen, why would a transgender support Hamas? What is going on there? Of course, this is like the intersectionality and all grievances are in one group. But what's happening there is this. My society did not accept me. And my society, they support Israel. Therefore, Israel and my society, they're on the same side. I am on the opposite side. And Hamas is on my side.
I take you to be saying that the real power of the Red-Green Alliance is that the red can use the green as a cudgel against the West, and the green can use the red for the same purpose.
Yeah, but the red is so stupid not to recognize it. They think that they can contain Islam. They think can, control it and utilize it. Embracing that and pushing for that project is anti-West, anti-humanity, Islamic supremacy. So when you support that project, you are destroying the future generation. And so that's why they are useful idiots. Whenever someone says that, the terrorists don't represent Islam, it's like, you don't represent Islam. They do. They understand Islam more than you would ever understand Islam. The majority, the extreme majority of Muslims, 98%, I'm not going to say 80% because according to some statistics, there are like 80% of Muslims who are moderate, or I would say 98%, okay, 99, I don't care. They would never participate in jihad. They would never go and join any terrorist group. That is ridiculous. They wouldn't do that. It's impractical. They are just human beings. They want to keep food on the table. They want, to take care of their families, build their future. But the problem is their sentiments, because they understand that what the 1% is doing is the real Islam. They will always side with what the 1% is doing, but not directly, because it doesn't look beautiful. So they would always try to justify what the 1% is doing, borrowing terminologies from the left, social justice, response,
or to quote Tucker, Islam is, the ISIS, not ISIS, but Hamas is a political movement.
Yeah, of course. Hamas is a political movement. I really want to comment on this, but before that, I want to talk about Zohran Mamdani's father. In his book, he said, suicide bombing is a political action, justified political action. Suicide bombing is a justified political action? Are you kidding me? They're doing it motivated by the fact that the moment they leave this world, they will be in the Islamic paradise. How is that political action and justified political action? So Hamas is the perfect example of what I have been saying in the past 5 minutes. Hamas has been doing jihad for a very long time. Muslims in the West, they wouldn't dare to support Hamas publicly because it's jihad, or Al-Qaeda, for example. But after October 7, because of what the radical left did, framing Hamas as the underdog, the victims, the oppressed, Muslims found it was the perfect window to step in and support Hamas based on that ground, the ground that the West provided. While in reality, they're supporting Hamas not based on that ground, but based on the Islamic ground of jihad. Because they believe that Hamas is doing jihad. Dinesh, I grew up as a Muslim, and I talk about this in my book. This is like a strong word, but I hated Palestinians in Jordan. Jordanian and Palestinians, they don't love each other. I'm Jordanian, and they saw them as invaders. We didn't like them. Just get the hell out of our country. You're stealing the jobs. We're poor because of you. However, whenever there was a march on the street for Palestine, I would be marching for Palestine. Now, isn't that contradictory? What's going on there?
I mean, in some ways, Danny, what's going on is the jihadi perspective is extremely clear, right? Which is basically you got the little Satan, Israel, you got the big Satan, and you got to get rid of them. The colonial argument is all garbled because the Jews have been in this land for 4,000 years. Their bones are there, their artifacts are there, their monuments are there. Clearly, Islam came in the 7th century, invaded the place, built the Dome of the Rock, constructed the Al-Aqsa Mosque on what used to be Jewish land. So who's the colonizer? I mean, how can the Jews colonize their own country? Isn't Islam the outsider? Didn't Islam come out of the Arabian desert? And yet I think what you're saying is that the left in this country, including, by the way, some of the jihadis, they can't overtly use the jihadi rationale. And so they switch to the colonial rationale, even though in some ways it's useful. It's
useful now. They can utilize it without being accused of terrorism or jihad or radicalism or anything. Actually, now they're coming with this moral superiority. They support Hamas, and they signal virtue. They're trying to make you feel bad about not supporting Hamas. Why? Because they have this frame. Hamas is liberation movement. So they're not at all mentioning that jihad part. Even though I always share a video on my social media, Mahmoud al-Zahar, the co-founder of Hamas, he was, meeting with a group of Hamas leaders, and he said this verbatim. He said, Palestine is not our project. Palestine is so small. It's like a toothpick. Our project is larger than that. Okay, what is their project? I thought it was liberating Palestine. It is the Islamic project, which is the caliphate, which is the establishment of the rule of Allah over the whole earth. Let me just say one thing about Tucker. It is ridiculous that Tucker Carlson gets to go to my country, Jordan, walk freely, meet with all these ultra-rich businessmen who are loyalists to the government, polish the image of how Christians are being equal, living freely in Jordan, and demonize Israel. And at the same time, I can't go to my country. Why? Because I converted to Christianity and because I am a Zionist. So imagine how the irony there. And at the same time, and this is very important, and Americans need to understand this, Tucker Carlson is interviewing people who know that when they criticize the Israeli government or Israel, nothing is going to happen to them. They come from Jerusalem sometimes, from Israel. They meet with Tucker. They vilify Israel. They attack Israel, and they go back. Nobody's going to touch them. However, the people who Tucker interviews on the other side, they don't have an option. They cannot say anything bad about their countries. For example, in Jordan, beside the fact that those who were interviewed in Jordan were ultra wealthy, loyal to the government, loyal to the king. And I love the king because the alternative is Islamic terrorism, but that is a different topic. But I mean, did that person have the chance or the ability to criticize the government without any consequences? The answer is no. Therefore, he doesn't have agency. He's not supposed to be interviewed. If you want to interview someone that doesn't care about the consequences and can say whatever they want. So it's not fair to bring people that they feel safe criticizing Israel and put them in front of the American public and tell the Americans, oh, look, this is the reality of Israel. While at the same time, you're getting people who are forced to share a certain narrative about the Islamic countries.
You're saying Tucker's not revealing the constraints on which these people are functioning, right? In which you might have a Christian source for Tucker, and this guy's going to say, well, you've got people who are second-class citizens in Israel. Well, there are second-class citizens in Qatar. There's second-class citizens. Christians are second-class citizens in every Muslim country. I think you said that there is not one of the 50-plus Muslim countries where you would not say that there is a kind of established doctrine of Islamic superiority. That's almost taken for granted.
100% of all the Islamic countries, not even one single Islamic country where Muslims and non-Muslims have 100% identical rights. That doesn't exist. There got to be, it's like, there are levels, of course, but it doesn't exist that you have the same rights as Muslims, even if it comes to small things. Islamic jihad did not appear as a response to Israeli aggression or Israeli colonialism or occupation. And Israel is not the reason why there's instability or instability in the Middle East since 1948. No, Israel was the victim of Islamic jihad that masqueraded under different covers. Sometimes it's Arab nationalism, sometimes it's Islamic rights. It doesn't matter. It's like Gamal Abdel Nasser, he used Arab nationalism to attack Israel, King Faisal in Saudi Arabia, and the war that was waged against Israel, it was waged by secular, semi-secular Western puppets leaders who accepted the concept of the nation state that was introduced by the British and the French in the region. But they did it because their people wanted it for religious reasons. So it's really, it all goes down to the fact that Israel, for the first time in that region, for the first time in a very long time, a non-Muslim body of people said we want sovereignty, and that was an affront to Islamic theology. It's like, no, this is an Islamic land. In Islam, not only people have religions, the land also has a religion. So if you convert to Islam, you're not allowed to convert out of Islam, right? The land,
The same.
the same. The land, once it's converted to Islam, the land cannot be taken out of Islam. So the land of Israel, it was Islamized at one point, and the Jews were welcome to live there. Actually, if you look back at Jewish groups coming back to the land, building the city of Tel Aviv in 1907, 1909, developing the port of Haifa, different institutions, there were no objection to that. They were welcomed. Arabs were actually moving or migrating from different countries or different regions to join the Jewish project of prosperity and progress. So why? Why there was no objection? Because that was taking place under the umbrella of Islam, because the Ottoman Caliphate, it was there in place. But once it was abolished, once it was destroyed by Ataturk, for the first time since the time of Muhammad, there was no Islamic Caliphate. Jews said, okay, since the British gave a country or a nation state to the Christian in Lebanon, to the different factions of Arabs in Syria, to the Iraqis, to the Eastern Jordan, we want the same thing. We want the nation state. At that point, Israel or the Jewish people turned into colonizing power.
Colonizing here in the sense that they were repossessing their own ancient homeland, but you're saying because it had fallen under the orbit of Islam, they were now not entitled to it. Islam never gives back what it takes, and Israel is now an imposter.
Absolutely. If the Jewish people wants to live in the land under an Islamic leadership, no problem. They're welcome to do that. If they are willing to live just like Christians in Jordan, for example, Muslims would welcome them. No problem with that.
Dan Burmawi, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Danny Burmawi argues that the battle over Israel is about much more than borders or politics. It's a clash of ideas, values, and competing visions for the future. If you found this conversation valuable, subscribe to Stand Tall Israel, share this video, and let us know in the comments below. Is the West finally waking up to what's happening in the Middle East, or are we still missing the bigger picture? If you have a 401k or an IRA, please listen. Gold is at record highs. What many people don't know is this: you can move part of your retirement money legally and without tax penalties into physical gold you actually own. Alpha Omega Gold helps you do this through a gold IRA. Your gold is real. It is stored safely. It is in your name. Learn more at ao.gold/stand. Alpha Omega Gold is our sponsor, and they proudly stand with Israel.